"Dear, I have a surprise for you. You're going to be a father," his wife told him. He smiled, agreeing it was good news, but deep down, the main character knew one thing: he was infertile, which could only mean his wife had been unfaithful. Hello, my dear friend. Let's dive into this story and discover what kind of surprise the main character has in store for those who betrayed him. And, while you're watching this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Allow me to introduce myself, Noah Smith. There's no point in sugarcoating it. I'm a genius, and that's not an exaggeration. From a young age, I was that standout kid in school, the one both teachers and classmates recognized as the smartest in the room. By 10th grade, I wasn't just coasting through anymore. I was already enrolled in college-level classes. I graduated with ease, and by 19 I had my degree in hand, ready to pursue a master's in computer science. Once that was done, I landed a job where my role was to keep things running smoothly. Confused? Let me explain. This morning, when you flipped on your bathroom light, that was thanks to me. When you splashed water on your face, that was me too. Even when you swiped your card for that pricey coffee, I had a hand in making sure the transaction went through. Get it now? To clarify electricity, water, payments, I'm the guy making sure nobody messes with those systems. I protect your data, keep the lights on, and ensure everything runs without a hitch. Now we're on the same page. However, all this knowledge didn't come without sacrifice. My personal life took a hit. I didn't have my first real relationship until I was 20, and even that felt more like a science project than romance. We both achieved the expected outcome and then never repeated the experience. It wasn't until I landed a hefty bonus and started earning a six-figure salary that I decided to give dating another serious try. I went all out: $3,000 on a suit, $155,000 on a Rolex, and even shelled out $400,000 for a Maserati. Yeah, the bonus was that big. But strangely enough, the first 2 nights were complete flops. Then, one evening, I parked my Maserati, walked into a bar, and took a seat. I ordered a neat whiskey. Even though I despised it, it was more for appearances. The bartender appreciated the generous tip, so I stuck around. Before long, a blonde woman sat beside me and ordered a drink. She talked, and I mostly listened for almost an hour. Normally, I keep conversations with women short to hide my shyness, but she kept talking. Just before she left, she asked if I wanted to take her to dinner that weekend. I got her number and address. That's how I found myself back in the dating scene. That weekend, I arrived at her place with flowers. She thanked me, put them in a vase, and we headed out for dinner. She was fascinated by the car, peppering me with questions about it. Dinner was at a fancy romantic restaurant, just as I had planned. Afterward, we drove aimlessly around the city. When we reached her house, I walked her to the door and got a kiss on the cheek. I felt like I was on top of the world when she suggested we meet again the following week. 2 weeks later, after a few more dates, she invited me to her place, and let's just say I became her official boyfriend. We paused for a while, then went for round 2, and she even called me a champion. This routine continued for 6 months. Then, one evening, while we were having a quiet night at home, she dropped the big news: I was going to be a father. I was shocked, and I'll explain why in a moment. I asked her what she planned to do. She said her religious beliefs wouldn't allow her to have an abortion, so she intended to keep the baby. I suggested we get married, wanting to do the right thing if that's what she wanted. She agreed, and 2 days later we were in Las Vegas tying the knot in a little chapel. We celebrated at the MGM Grand and then headed home to begin our new life. I helped her move out of her apartment and into my home, which was more than just a house. It was a sprawling mansion with 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a 4-car garage, a pool, tennis courts, a jacuzzi, and even a gym in the basement, though I never used it. There was also a 30-seat movie theater, which, like the gym, stayed unused. She seemed to enjoy the new lifestyle. She quit her job to focus on becoming a mother. Every day, I braced myself for the moment when she might be devastated by a miscarriage. You see, we had agreed to be faithful when we started dating, and I had trusted that promise. But when she told me she was pregnant, she didn't know that I had been infertile for years. My infertility was due to a condition I contracted as a child. Since my mother had refused to vaccinate me, the illness left me sterile. It was a secret I had never shared with my wife, and I had resigned myself to the fact that I would never have children. As an only child with no parents or relatives left, I had accepted being alone. So when she told me we were having twins, it was the happiest moment of my life, despite knowing the truth. I let her believe everything was fine. When the twins were born, I embraced them as my own two boys with my black hair and blue eyes, though they had their mother's nose. Even knowing they weren't mine, I loved them as if they were. For a while, everything seemed perfect, but a couple of months after the twins were born, Elizabeth began to change. The doctors said she had postpartum depression, and during that time we went through 3 different nannies. She became withdrawn, and communication was nearly impossible. Just as I had accepted that this would be our new normal, she suddenly snapped out of it. She was happy again, smiling, playing with the boys, and started going out once or twice a week to reconnect with old friends. I didn't ask any questions. Our relationship improved, and we spent more time together. I took on more responsibility with the kids, often doing the night shifts, which brought me a sense of fulfillment. But one day, during lunch, one of Elizabeth's old friends approached me and asked how she and the twins were doing. As she was about to leave, she said, "Tell Elizabeth to call me sometime. We haven't talked in ages." Her comment caught me off guard. Just the night before, Elizabeth had gone out for drinks with that same friend. That's when suspicion crept in. I installed a GPS tracker on her car, another on her phone, and discreetly placed cameras around the house in case she brought someone home. She didn't. But the trackers revealed where she went and who she met with the next time she went out for drinks. I followed her to a motel on the outskirts of town, parking just outside room 104 with the twins still in their car seats. I waited, watching her car parked next to another vehicle, the only one with local plates. I took pictures of both cars and their license plates before heading home. By the time she returned, I had already bathed the boys and put them to bed. She took a shower, slipped into bed beside me, kissed my cheek, and said she was exhausted. Yes, I could imagine why. The next day, I sent the photos to the wife of Liam Murphy. His car had been parked outside the Super 9 motel. In my message, I added that the other car belonged to Elizabeth Smith. The fallout was swift. Mrs. Murphy came to our house and slapped Elizabeth across the face. I rushed home, pretending I had received the same pictures in my inbox, arriving just in time to witness the slap. When I confronted Elizabeth, she didn't try to hide the truth. With tears in her eyes, she confessed, blaming everything on a moment of weakness caused by her depression. She cried, and I cried with her. Somehow I found the strength to forgive her. I tried to understand, to make sense of it all, but I was clear about one thing: this was her only chance. If it ever happened again, I would leave and take the boys with me. For nearly a year, life seemed to return to normal after she swore she had learned her lesson, but I never fully relaxed. I kept the trackers in place, and the hidden cameras continued recording. From Elizabeth Smith's side of the story, the biggest mystery remained: how did Noah and Liam uncover her affair? Noah, sitting at home with our kids, was completely unaware of what I had done. After months of failing to conceive with him, I decided to take matters into my own hands. One night I went to a bar, locked eyes with a stranger, dark hair, blue eyes, his name long forgotten. We spent the night together until he was too tired to continue. My plan had worked perfectly. Now Noah was so attached to the children that he threatened to take them from me. The irony was unbearable. He didn't even realize we lived in a no-fault state. Even if I had slept with the entire local high school football team, the law would still be on my side. The house, the kids, they'd all stay with me, and Noah would be stuck paying alimony and child support. I've never worked, and his steady income from whatever computer work he does would secure my future. He's always been vague about his job. Not long after Liam's wife slapped me and filed for divorce, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years: Oscar Lee, my first love. You understand, don't you? It was back in school. He was a senior basketball player, and I was a junior. It ended when my father's job moved us to another state. I hadn't heard anything about Oscar since some old friends mentioned he'd gotten into trouble with the law and then disappeared. Yet here he was, standing in front of me. He hadn't changed. The moment he looked at me, I knew he recognized me. "Oscar," I asked, barely believing it was him. "Elizabeth," he replied. He reached out, but instead of shaking his hand, I kissed him right there in the grocery store bread aisle. We quickly exchanged numbers. I told him right away I was married but interested in reconnecting. We immediately arranged a meetup. He said he wasn't seeing anyone and rented a house in a nice neighborhood. I knew the area well, and it would be much easier to visit him there than sneaking around in hotels. He mentioned his odd hours working as a warehouse manager, having Wednesdays and Thursdays off. I found that a bit strange but didn't question it. One small thing caught my attention: his shirt had Ethan embroidered on it instead of Oscar. I made a mental note to ask him about that later, but at the moment I needed to head home. The nanny was leaving at 3, and I still had to make dinner for Noah. From Noah's perspective, I got home, and the house was filled with the smell of stew. Elizabeth seemed unusually cheerful, almost too sweet, which immediately raised my suspicions. Something felt off. I checked the GPS data from her car and phone. Nothing suspicious had shown up since the last time she'd cheated. She was acting like her old self again, and we had resumed our intimate relationship. We were together several times a week, and it felt like we were functioning as a couple again. But something about her behavior still nagged at me, so I decided to increase my surveillance. That night after dinner, I took her phone under the pretext of needing to check something. I installed an app that would notify me of any calls she received or made, allowing me to eavesdrop on conversations and see her call logs without her knowing. The app even let me use her phone as a listening device, picking up any conversations within a 15-foot radius. Modern technology is truly impressive. Back to Elizabeth's perspective, I waited until the following Tuesday to call Oscar. Here's the truth: I do love Noah, in my own way. At least I think I do. I grew up in a family where money was always tight, but my parents made do. I swore to myself I'd do better than they did. So when I saw Noah pull up in his flashy Maserati and sit at the bar with his Rolex on display, I made my move. I did whatever it took to make him mine. This shy, introverted man became putty in my hands within months, and my life changed completely. I married him, got pregnant, and he was over the moon about becoming a father. His excitement sealed my fate. I was bound to him, to his life, to the financial security his salary provided. But that didn't stop me from pursuing my plans with Oscar. Noah would never suspect a thing. He wouldn't notice that on Wednesday, I parked my car in Oscar's garage. Slipping into his house through the garage door, I felt that familiar rush. No one knew where I was, and I made sure to leave no traces. Today had to be perfect, no evidence. How can I describe my time with Oscar? It was exhilarating. I reveled in the thrill of deception, knowing my attentive husband had no idea. At one point I even told Oscar he was better than Noah in every way. Of course, most of it was said in the heat of the moment, without much thought. In reality, I hadn't considered Oscar in years. When we were finished, I went to the bathroom to freshen up. Oscar tried to persuade me to stay longer, but I knew I had to get home before Noah started asking questions. I promised Oscar I'd return the next day. There was a Mother's Day event at our church, which meant I could drop off the kids at 9 a.m. and pick them up at 3 p.m. We'd have plenty of time together. Oscar was thrilled, and we agreed to meet again. On the drive home, I felt a surge of elation. I had regained control. But later, a wave of guilt began creeping in. To push it away, I didn't resist when Noah initiated intimacy that night. I let him think everything was perfectly normal. From Noah's perspective, she believed she was being clever, assuming I hadn't caught on to her tricks. She thought I hadn't noticed what she was up to. Sure, I missed the early signs, but I overheard enough during one of her phone calls with her lover. She was practically giddy, telling him how much she missed him and that he was the best she'd ever had. Unbelievable. I thought we had moved beyond this nonsense, but after digging deeper, I found more than I expected. The house she had been visiting was rented by someone named Ethan Anderson, a black man who worked at a warehouse and had his own car. How did she meet him, and why did she call him Oscar? I needed more time to sort this out and come up with a plan to deal with him, just like I handled the situation with the Murphys. From Oscar's perspective, here's my side of the story. I played basketball in high school, not bad, but not good enough to take me anywhere. In my senior year, I met a girl named Elizabeth, and we started dating. One night I took her virginity in the backseat of my grandma's Buick. That night was unforgettable. We dated for about 6 months before she moved away, and that was the last I saw of her. After high school, I didn't have many options. College wasn't a possibility for a poor black kid who barely made it through school. My basketball skills didn't get me anywhere either, so I turned to the streets. I started hustling, selling drugs on the corner, and was making decent money. My grandma hated it, begged me to stop, but there weren't any better choices for me. Over time, I worked my way up. One of the Mexican bosses took a liking to me, and soon I had my own crew on the streets. One night we caught one of my guys stealing. To make an example of him, I dragged him into an alley and shot him. I thought about dumping the gun in the river, but I remembered something my Mexican boss loved to shoot for fun. Once, after a trip to the range, I joked that my gun didn't shoot straight. He fired a few rounds, handed it back, and said, "It's not the gun, it's the shooter." I just smiled and tucked that memory away. For the next few years, things went smoothly. I climbed the ranks of the La Sombra cartel, controlled my own territory, and the money kept coming in. Everything was routine until I was smuggling 10 kilograms of heroin across the border, and one of my tires blew out. A patrol officer stopped to help, but in my panic I tried too hard to convince him everything was fine. His suspicions grew, and before I knew it, 5 patrol cars had surrounded me. My secret was out. These weren't just local cops, they were federal agents. After I was processed and put in a cell, a lawyer appeared and told me to keep quiet. He assured me he could work out a deal. 2 days later, he returned with an offer minus 25 years in prison, with a chance of parole after 15. Reluctantly, I agreed. While sitting in my cell, I requested to speak with the DEA agent who arrested me. In a private room, I offered him a deal. I fabricated a story about a street shooter named Juan Flores, and how I'd come across a gun with his fingerprints on it. In exchange for witness protection, I handed over the weapon. The gun was tested, and Juan was arrested. I testified against him in court, and he was sentenced to 99 years in a maximum security federal prison with no chance of parole and limited visits. Later, I found out that Juan was the eldest son of Don Fernando, the powerful leader of the La Sombra cartel. As expected, Don Fernando didn't take my betrayal lightly. Soon after, I learned he had put a $500,000 bounty on my head, with decapitation as the method of choice. The FBI quickly relocated me to a new city and paid me $100,000 for my testimony. I rented a modest apartment and got a job working in a warehouse. For 2 years, I lived a quiet life, operating a forklift, loading and unloading trucks, and thinking my past was behind me. That illusion shattered the day a truck driver called out Oscar. My heart raced as I turned to see a familiar face from my high school basketball team. We shook hands, and he told me he had moved to town with his wife to be closer to her family. He suggested we catch up over the weekend. As soon as he left, I contacted my handler at the marshal's office. That same night, I was moved to a dingy motel. I spent 2 days there, memorizing my new identity before starting another job search. Fortunately, forklift operators were always in demand, and I quickly settled into a new routine. One day on my day off, I ran into Elizabeth. It had been years since I'd last thought of her, but our conversation rekindled old feelings. Against my better judgment, I didn't inform the marshals. The idea of moving again exhausted me, and Elizabeth assured me she had just as much to lose. Her husband might not be as dangerous as my enemies, but she wasn't willing to give up her comfortable life. We agreed that if we were cautious, no one would ever find out. It seemed like the perfect setup. We both got what we wanted, and no one would know. Our first meeting was short, as Elizabeth had to get home, but she promised to return the next day with plenty of time. From Elizabeth's perspective, she hurriedly dropped off the twins at church before heading to meet Oscar. The entire day was hers to enjoy, and she planned to savor every minute. She pulled into the garage, which was already open and waiting for her, and her heart raced with excitement. Her secret was safe. No one knew where she was, and her car was hidden from view. She had 5 hours of peace ahead of her, and she was in bliss. She placed her phone on the bedside table, just in case anything urgent happened with the kids or her husband Noah. She didn't expect any emergencies, but it didn't hurt to be cautious. From Noah's perspective, that day changed everything. I heard it all, her desperate pleas urging him not to stop, the sounds she made that I never knew she could, the way he touched her in ways I never had. But the final blow came when she screamed, "Oscar Lee, you're the best I've ever had." Now I had a name. Could Ethan Anderson be the mysterious neighbor? But wait, the driver's license clearly said Ethan Anderson, and the photo was a match. This was getting deeper. Time to dig into Oscar Akin's background. Jackpot. Turns out Oscar is in the witness protection program. A little digging on the dark web, and I found out there's a hefty bounty on his head from the La Sombra cartel, known for their ruthless treatment of traitors. I had a feeling they'd be willing to strike a deal with me. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Elizabeth entered the room. The surprise on her face showed she hadn't expected me home so early. Normally, I don't return until 5, so she was clearly caught off guard. From Elizabeth's perspective, Noah's home early. Something must have happened at work. Maybe tonight I can offer him some affection to relieve his stress. She rushed over, expecting a kiss, but I ignored her and focused on sitting the boys in front of the TV. A small sense of unease crept into her, but she brushed it aside and headed to the kitchen to start dinner. Just as she was about to begin, I stopped her and asked her to sit. The unease in her stomach grew stronger. "I got a call today," I said, looking at her. "From your phone." She blinked, confused. "My phone," she repeated. "Listen to this," I said, pulling out my phone and pressing play. The sound of her voice, begging for more, filled the air. "Oh yes, harder, just like that. Don't stop." Panic washed over her as she slammed her hand down, stopping the recording. She must have accidentally called me when she left her phone on the nightstand. Thoughts raced through her mind, but before she could speak, I broke the silence. "Do you remember what I said when I found out you cheated again?" I asked, my eyes locked on her. The quiet, introverted man she had manipulated into marrying her now stood with an unexpected firmness. She shifted her tactics. "Noah, stop this. You won't divorce me," she said, her confidence growing. "You'll lose everything. This is a no-fault state. Infidelity changes nothing. The boys and I will stay in the house, and you'll be paying for everything: alimony, child support, the works. You know I don't work, and with your income, the alimony will be significant." A sly smile crept across her face. "Honestly, I could even have Oscar help me raise your kids, and there's nothing you could do about it. So before you ruin your life, think carefully." My irritation reached its peak. "Who is Oscar?" I asked, my voice steady. "He's my high school sweetheart, my first love," she replied calmly. "We bumped into each other at the grocery store last week. Yesterday was the first time we slept together." She leaned forward, taking control of the conversation again. "And just so you know, I didn't come home and offer you leftovers from him. Believe me, it's going to end with him soon. He's not that good in bed, honestly. Selfish. In a few months, maybe 3. This will all pass. We'll go back to raising our boys together. Or would you prefer to see them once a month from some dingy apartment?" She spoke smoothly. "I'm offering you this. I'll stay with you and see Oscar on the side. What do you say?" I hesitated before answering. "All right, but there are a few conditions, and I expect you to meet them." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What conditions?" "First, you can't fall in love with him and leave me." She laughed, brushing off my concern. "Don't worry about that. It won't happen. He's a warehouse worker. I'm not leaving you for a man like that. Second," I continued, "he is never to set foot in this house." "Deal," she agreed without hesitation. "He'll never come here. This house is for us and our family." "And third," I added, "I don't want Oscar to know I'm aware of him. That will be our secret, something I can hold on to when he's with you." She whispered softly, "That's easy, darling. I promise he'll always think it's just him and me." "I understand why you want that." She paused. "What stays just between us?" She continued, "Is this no calls to Oscar from the home phone? If you need to talk to him, step out onto the terrace and use your mobile." "That's fine," she responded indifferently. "I barely called him anyway, and he's never called me. I just checked if he was home, not at work, so it's no big deal." She hesitated, then added, "Noah, this isn't some teenage crush. There's no love here. For both of us, it's just physical. That's why I know it won't last long." I replied, "All right." "Agreed," she said with a faint smile. "When do you plan on meeting Oscar again?" I asked. "As I already told you," she said, "it'll only be midweek Wednesdays and Thursdays. No dinners, no drinks, no going out. It's purely physical, nothing more." I nodded without speaking. Deep inside, Elizabeth thought, I love Noah in my own way. He's remarkable in many aspects, but he's also naive. I can get out of any situation with him. All I have to do is promise to reignite the passion in our relationship, and he'll forgive my mistakes. Give it 6 months, and he'll even allow me to be with Oscar while he watches. Noah is the ideal partner, he just doesn't realize it yet. From Noah's perspective, I told her I'd be working all weekend, Saturday and Sunday. That was a lie. In reality, I was tying up loose ends, covering my tracks, and deleting all my search queries about Oscar Lee and Ethan Anderson from the dark web. I also set up a meeting with a lawyer in another city. What lawyer, you ask? It was Juan Flores' attorney who was appealing his case. I had valuable information, including the location of a key witness and a video clip I knew would interest him. but it wasn't cheap. When he asked for the price, I said $500,000. He quickly understood the situation. On Sunday night, I pretended to be tired, acting uninterested in any intimacy. Elizabeth accused me of sulking. At dawn on Tuesday, I left the house and took a 2-hour flight to the city where Juan Flores' lawyer worked. I had taken the day off from work, telling Elizabeth I had an important business meeting and would return late. The lawyer's office was grand, the door marked with the name Rafael Torres, attorney. He struck me as a man deeply concerned with his own importance. I was ushered in right away. "Mr. Smith, how can I assist you?" Mr. Torres asked as he greeted me. "Actually, Mr. Torres, I believe I'm the one who can help you," I replied, settling into the chair. "Let's get straight to the point. I have information that could aid in Juan Flores's appeal." I handed him a USB drive, which he examined briefly before plugging it into his computer. After about 10 minutes of reviewing the contents, he turned to me. "Where did you get this footage?" he inquired. "The shooting range stores all its security camera footage on a cloud server," I explained. "So you're looking to make a deal?" he asked. "Yes," I responded smoothly, "and regarding the other matter, I know the whereabouts of a key witness, but I need something in return." I let the offer linger, the weight of it settling in the air. "Could you wait in the lobby for a bit? I need to discuss something with a colleague," he said, rising from his chair and heading for the door. I nodded, feeling the anxiety build as I took a seat in the lobby, unsure of what was coming next. After about 15 minutes, the door opened and an impressive woman stood in the doorway. She exuded elegance and confidence, clearly someone who commanded attention. She hadn't been there earlier, so she must have come from another part of the office. "Good afternoon, Mr. Smith," she greeted warmly, her voice soft yet assured. "My name is Valeria. How about we have lunch together?" The unexpected invitation caught me off guard. I fumbled for a response, sure, probably louder than necessary. Just then, Torres appeared behind her. "From now on, you'll be dealing with Valeria. She'll handle everything," he said. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Smith, and I'm sorry we couldn't be of more assistance." Valeria gently took my arm and guided me toward the elevator. "Don't worry," she said soothingly. "Juan prefers to stay out of these matters, so I'll take care of it." I winced at the mention of lawyers. I had never been fond of dealing with them. We descended in silence to the garage, where a man stood waiting beside a sleek black car with tinted windows. The driver opened the door, revealing an impeccable leather interior. The car looked like it belonged to someone you'd never want to cross, perhaps a mafia boss. Without a word, Valeria slid into the back seat and motioned for me to join her. "Coming?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with a playful glint. I hesitated briefly before getting in, realizing that there was no turning back now. The phrase "no way out" echoed in my mind. As I sat beside her, I noticed how graceful she looked, her long, dark hair flowing down her back, and her nearly black eyes seemed to look straight through me. She leaned forward slightly and gave the driver instructions. "Let's head to Mama Torres' restaurant. I hope you enjoy Mexican food," she added with a wink. Nervousness settled in again, the familiar feeling that always crept in when talking to confident women. I couldn't seem to gather my thoughts. Sensing the awkward silence, I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, she gently placed her hand on mine and fixed her gaze on me. "Wait until we get to the restaurant," she whispered softly. "We'll have more privacy there." Lowering her voice even further, she added, "I've seen what's on the flash drive." The rest of the ride passed in silence, but my thoughts were racing. I kept stealing glances at her composed posture, the way she crossed her legs so elegantly, the fine details of her outfit that accentuated her allure. When we arrived at the restaurant, it was clear Valeria was well known there. We were led to a private room, and once the door closed behind us, the waiter discreetly activated a small device, near the entrance a signal jammer. I smirked. Things were about to get interesting. "Noah," Valeria began, her tone now serious. "We can speak freely here. Do you know where Oscar Akins is?" "Yes," I replied, fully aware of where this was going. "We're offering $500,000 for information on his location. Tell me where he is, and you'll get the money," she said, her voice professional but with a hint of warmth. "And as for the flash drive, what's your price?" "I don't want money for the flash drive," I said firmly. "It's free. I found it while digging into Oscar's past. Honestly, a good lawyer, or even the feds, could have found this a long time ago. It could have prevented all of this. The feds were so desperate to pin something on one that when Oscar handed them his evidence, they didn't look deeper. They just needed something for an indictment. I shook my head in disbelief. Valeria leaned forward, considering my words. Well, let's hope this helps now. Aside from the reward, is there anything else you need? I can make things happen. I paused, carefully choosing my next words. Actually, there is one more thing. Just as the waiter brought out an impressive spread of sizzling fajitas, rich enchiladas, beans, creamy guacamole, soft tortillas, and tacos, I couldn't help but be impressed. 2 bottles of chilled beer accompanied the meal perfectly. Let's eat, and you can tell me everything, Valeria suggested. As we enjoyed what was easily the best Mexican food I'd ever tasted, I began telling her my story, everything from my childhood to the moment my wife asked if I would allow her to have an affair with Oscar. When I got to the part where I found out that I couldn't be the father of the twins because I was infertile, Valeria smirked slightly. I felt my irritation rise, but she quickly apologized. It's not meant to mock you, she explained. It's just that I understand what it feels like to want a family but realize it's not possible. She shared her own past, how, at 15, she had developed serious problems with her menstruation. Doctors found cysts on her ovaries that had to be removed, leaving her unable to have children. When I mentioned my wife's 2 affairs, Valeria muttered through gritted teeth, her contempt unmistakable. Finally, when I had laid everything out, the moment I feared arrived. If you take Oscar, take her too, I said. Then we'll be even. Her words struck me like a blow. Are you sure? What about the boys? I asked, my voice trembling. They're not even 3, they won't remember her, she replied with cold indifference. I'll hire a full-time nanny, and soon enough they won't even recall their deceitful mother. When will they be together again? I asked, feeling a growing emptiness inside. Tomorrow morning, I answered myself. Then say your final goodbye to your wife tomorrow morning, she said, leaving no room for argument. So soon? I asked, surprised. Don't you need more time to get everything arranged? There's less than a day left. She cut me off sharply. Last time we waited until the weekend, and he slipped away. That won't happen again. Now, give me his address, she commanded as she stood up. If you're ready, I'll take you to the airport. I finished my last beer and followed her outside. She hailed a cab, and as I reached for the door, she gently stopped me. I turned to face her, looking into her deep, unwavering eyes. She leaned in, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered, "Thank you." As the cab pulled away, I watched her step into her own car and close the door behind her. It was then I realized I probably wouldn't see her again. Now it's Wednesday, and I'm sitting in my bunker, the place where I handle everything I've just told you. A call came from the secretary on the 2nd floor, informing me that there were visitors in the lobby. I took the elevator down, slipped through the side door into my office, and gave her the signal to let them in. A man walked in. "Mr. Smith, I'm Detective Callum, and this is my partner, Rhys Jones." We shook hands, and I motioned for them to sit down. "Mr. Smith, I'll get straight to the point. Do you know where your wife is right now?" "This morning, she told me she was going to the mall after the nanny arrived, then pick up groceries and head home." "Why? What happened?" He slid a photo toward me. "Is this your wife?" The blood drained from my face. Oh my God, yes. What happened? "We're still gathering details. We were called to investigate reports of gunshots at Ethan Anderson's house. Your wife was found dead at the scene." "Do you know Ethan Anderson?" I stared blankly, unable to process what he was saying. "No, I don't," I whispered, my breathing becoming shallow. "Please, give me a minute." My thoughts turned to the twins, and my voice trembled. "Our boys." "I understand this is difficult," Callum said gently, "but we need answers. Where were you around 10 this morning?" "I've been here all day. I arrived around 8, as usual, and haven't left since. You can ask my secretary or contact Special Agent Alligator from the FBI. He was in my office from 9 to 10:30 while I helped with some background checks. Go ahead, call him. Let him verify my alibi." "And then you'll be free to catch the real killer," I said, struggling to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Where did they find her?" I demanded, standing up. Callum didn't respond. Instead, he stepped outside, likely to speak with the secretary or get in touch with the FBI. A few minutes later, he returned, leaning down to whisper something in Jones's ear. "Your story checks out," Jones said, clearly reluctant. "Do you know a man named Oscar Lee?" Not personally, I admitted. He was someone from my wife's past, a high school romance. She mentioned him once, a long time ago. Jones nodded, his expression darkening. It turns out Oscar Lee and Ethan Anderson are the same person. I stared at him, stunned. How is that even possible? Witness protection program, Callum interjected, settling back into his chair. Here's our theory. Either the Lazenborough cartel figured out his true identity and he blamed your wife for outing him, which led to her murder, or he wanted to run away with her, and when she refused, he killed her. Either way, he's guilty. We have the murder weapon, a .45 caliber pistol, covered in his fingerprints. I tried to process everything, but why was she with him, Oscar or Ethan? Whoever he was. Callum didn't soften the blow. There's evidence they were having an affair. I'm sorry, but that's the reality we're dealing with. A wave of nausea twisted in my stomach. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't even know my voice trailed off in disbelief. Callum's tone softened slightly. I understand this is hard to take, but we don't believe it lasted long. He only returned to town a few months ago. The weight of the situation began to settle over me. Why was I the prime suspect, I asked. At first glance, it looked like a crime of passion, a jealous husband. But the deeper we dug, the more it pointed to his past with the cartel. I'm truly sorry for your loss, Mr. Smith. We'll keep you updated as the investigation continues. All I want is justice, I said, feeling the pressure of the moment bearing down on me, but keep me and my kids out of this. Those cartel guys, they don't forget. Callum nodded, his expression firm. We'll make sure you stay off their radar. They're ruthless, no doubt about it. Once they target someone, they don't let go. But don't worry, you're not involved. They left, giving me a sympathetic glance as they exited. The only other time I heard from the authorities was when the coroner called. They said I could pick up her body. I didn't hesitate. I contacted a crematorium immediately and arranged for her cremation. A few days later, I took her ashes to the beach. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elizabeth had always hated the ocean. Liar. Cheater, I muttered under my breath. You despise the sea, and now it's your final resting place. I stepped into the surf, scattering her ashes into the waves, laughing bitterly as they dissolved into the water. I took 2 weeks off, not to mourn her, but to spend time with my kids and keep my mind from spiraling into darkness. One afternoon, I heard a car pull up. Glancing out the window, I recognized the familiar black Anderson Town car, and a knot of dread formed in my chest. What now? When I opened the door, Valeria stood there, her brother Lewis beside her, both holding suitcases. I heard you need a live-in housekeeper, she said with a sly smile. Well, problem solved. I stood there, speechless. Are you just going to stand there, she teased. Go help Miguel with the rest of the bags. But, still confused, I followed Miguel to the car, helping unload what seemed like an endless amount of luggage. After a firm handshake and a knowing wink from him, I returned inside to find Valeria in the living room, playing with my boys. They were happily tugging at her long, dark hair. Have they eaten yet? She asked, looking up at me. No, I replied, still trying to grasp what was happening. Good. You watch them while I make lunch, she said with a smile, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, Valeria entered my life. That night, she moved into my bedroom. The next morning, she began packing up all of Elizabeth's things from clothes to photos into black trash bags. She called a charity service, and by noon, everything was gone. Later, after the boys were asleep, Valeria and I sat at the kitchen table. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened with everything left unsaid. Come on, Noah, she said, losing patience. Let's get this over with. Ask all the questions you need to. He froze, unsure. Good question, I replied, though I didn't feel calm at all. When your wife arrived that morning, Oscar was already on his way to Mexico. We picked him up the night before, right after he finished his shift at the warehouse. He didn't suspect anything and was just heading home. We made sure his fingerprints were on the gun before sending him off. When Elizabeth arrived around 9:30, I was the only one there. I told her that you had rejected her and that I would be the one raising her children from now on. I assured her I would take good care of both them and you. Then I shot her 3 times in the chest. It was over quickly. Oh, and there's one more thing, I added with a bitter smile. I told her that you could have me whenever you wanted, no strings attached, and unlike her, I wouldn't give you anything second-rate. That's when she decided to pull the trigger. Do you know where the investigation stands now? Noah asked, his tone shifting. And what about Juan? Now that Oscar framed him for the murder. The FBI is distancing themselves from Oscar. I explained, first, because he's wanted for your wife's murder, and second, because the judge accepted the shooting range video as evidence. It shows Juan and Oscar at the range together. Oscar places the gun on the table, and Juan loads the magazine. He fires 10 rounds, praising the weapon Oscar bought. Afterward, Juan watched as Oscar placed the gun in a plastic bag. That's the same gun Oscar later used to kill that guy on the corner, only this time Juan's fingerprints were deliberately left on it. Now Juan's wanted for that murder too. And where is Juan now? Noah asked. He's hiding with our father, I replied, pausing. But there's something you should know. Our father is actually Juan's sister and Oscar's mother. I wasn't there, I continued, but they say Oscar was buried somewhere in the desert south of El Paso? There was a brief silence before I hesitated, then spoke again. There's one more thing I need to ask. It's personal, but important. Go ahead, he responded, his voice steady. I'll be honest, I started. It's about Elizabeth. She had issues with my size. Will that be a problem for us? If it is, we should end this now. He replied firmly. Elizabeth broke my heart, and in the end I came to hate her. But there's an American saying I've always liked, it's not about the size of the magic wand, but the magic it makes. Believe me, Noah, you've got all the magic I need. 3 months later, we got married. For our honeymoon, she insisted on Cancun, Mexico, and I let her plan everything. It turned out that her father owned one of the resorts there. Curiously, she never asked me for money, not for groceries, utilities, or even the pool maintenance. Everything just seemed to appear, including the plane tickets for the wedding, all arranged without a word from her. When I suggested bringing the twins along, she quickly dismissed the idea, saying a honeymoon wasn't the time for kids. Instead, she hired a nanny, an elderly Mexican woman, who, as it turned out, had cared for Valeria during her own childhood. Her husband, Luis, was Valeria's bodyguard. After we returned home, they both moved in with us. My boys started calling Valeria Mom, truly believing she was their biological mother. The nanny, however, became affectionately known as Abe, short for Abuela. Our kids grew up bilingual, and we never revealed the truth about their real mother. Life continued smoothly after that. And with that, my friend, this is the end of the story. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. May the Force be with you.